Okay. I need you to imagine someone. This person painted two of the most famous paintings in human history. Designed a functional helicopter in 1489. Designed a tank in 1487. Designed a solar power concentrator in the 1490s. Invented scissors. Was the first person to correctly explain why the sky is blue. Studied human anatomy so thoroughly he was essentially a doctor, despite having zero medical training. Designed a robot. A robot. In the 1400s. Oh, and he also designed shoes, wrote music, played the lyre better than almost anyone in Italy, and apparently could bend horseshoes with his bare hands. This is Leonardo da Vinci. And the thing that gets me every time I read about him is not how brilliant he was. It's how much he didn't finish. This man left behind roughly 7,000 pages of notes and sketches and maybe 15 completed paintings. 15. In his whole life. Because he kept getting distracted by everything else. Let's talk about him. Leonardo was born on April 15, 1452, in Vinci, a small town in Tuscany, Italy. He was illegitimate. His father, Ser Piero da Vinci, was a notary, basically a legal professional, and his mother, Caterina, was a peasant woman. They were not married. Ser Piero later married someone else. Then someone else after that. He had a total of 12 children with his various wives, not counting Leonardo. So Leonardo grew up in a complicated family situation, raised partly by his father, partly by an uncle who apparently genuinely loved him, and partly by grandparents. He didn't go to school in any formal sense. He couldn't read Latin, which in the 15th century was basically the language of educated people. He taught himself to read and write. He was, as he described himself later, an uneducated man. He also wrote backwards. Not like, occasionally. Consistently. His notebooks are written in mirror script, right to left, reversed, so you need a mirror to read them easily. Nobody is completely sure why. Left-handed people sometimes do this to avoid smearing ink. Maybe he was just more comfortable with it. Maybe he wanted privacy. Maybe Leonardo da Vinci just decided normal writing was for other people. At around age 14, his father arranged for him to apprentice with Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most important artists and engineers in Florence at the time. This turned out to be a good call. Leonardo was so clearly better than everyone in the workshop almost immediately that the story goes, and this might be legend, but it's a good one, that when Leonardo painted an angel in one of Verrocchio's paintings, Verrocchio was so outclassed that he put down his brush and never painted again. Verrocchio didn't stop being an artist. He continued doing sculpture. He just apparently decided, okay, I cannot compete with this person on painting, I'm going to do something else. Which is one of the more extreme reactions to being outdone by your intern. Here's what made Leonardo genuinely different. He refused to accept received wisdom. He would not take anyone's word for anything. He wanted to observe, measure, and understand everything himself from scratch. He dissected over 30 human corpses. This was illegal and extremely difficult to arrange in the 1400s. He did it anyway because he wanted to understand how the human body actually worked, not how ancient texts said it worked, not what the church taught, but what he could see with his own eyes. His anatomical drawings, cross-sections of skulls, studies of the heart, detailed illustrations of musculature, are so accurate that doctors use them as references today. In the 1400s. No medical school. No supervision. Just, let me personally look inside every part of a human body until I understand it completely. He also studied water constantly. He was obsessed with how water moved. He filled notebook after notebook with observations about currents, waves, eddies, flow patterns. He wrote, water is the driver of nature. He drew water the way most people breathe, constantly, naturally, without stopping. He studied birds flying. He studied how light fell on surfaces. He studied geology, botany, optics, acoustics, mathematics. Here's the thing about all of this. None of these were considered separate disciplines in his mind. He didn't think, now I am doing science, now I am doing art. For him, understanding how light actually worked was part of painting light correctly. Understanding how muscles attach to bones was part of painting a human figure correctly. It was all one thing. He called it knowing. The word he used was sapere, to know. He just wanted to know everything. Not to publish it, not to become famous for it, not to teach it. Just to know it. Which is beautiful and also explains why he finished almost nothing. Let's go through some of what Leonardo designed, because I think people underestimate how far ahead of his time he was. The aerial screw, essentially a helicopter. He designed a machine with a helical screw that would, in theory, lift itself into the air by spinning fast enough. He was 400 years early. It wouldn't work with the materials available to him, but the concept was correct. The armored vehicle, essentially a tank. A covered vehicle with cannons pointing in all directions. He presented the design to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, as a military innovation. He also, interestingly, included a design flaw in the plans he gave to the Duke. The gears were reversed so it wouldn't actually work. Some historians think he did this on purpose because he didn't want his war machine to actually be used. Leonardo the pacifist, sabotaging his own weapons design. The robotic knight, an armored knight figure designed to sit up, move its arms, and turn its head. Powered by a system of cables and pulleys. This is basically a robot. In 1495, NASA engineer Mark Rosheim recreated it in 2002 based on Leonardo's sketches. It worked. The solar power concentrator, a curved mirror designed to focus sunlight for industrial heating. He was thinking about alternative energy in the 1490s. He also designed a bridge 240 meters long for the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, who asked him for one as a civil engineering project. The Sultan didn't build it. Norway built a version of it in 2001, using Leonardo's design. It worked perfectly. He designed a city. An entire city, with 2 levels, one for pedestrians, one for vehicles and services, with separate canals for waste. He pitched this to Ludovico Sforza. Sforza passed. The concept of separating pedestrian and vehicle traffic wouldn't be widely implemented until the 20th century. He invented scissors. Honestly, after the helicopter and the tank and the robot and the bridge, invented scissors feels like a footnote. Now here's the paradox at the center of Leonardo's life. He is remembered as one of the greatest painters in history. And he was. But he left behind approximately 15 to 20 completed paintings, depending on how you count. For a career spanning about 45 years, that's not many. He was famous for not finishing things. He was commissioned to paint the Adoration of the Magi in 1481. He left it unfinished. He was commissioned to paint St. Jerome in the wilderness around the same time. Left unfinished. He spent 16 years on the Mona Lisa and considered it unfinished when he died. He carried the Mona Lisa with him everywhere for the last 12 years of his life. She moved with him when he moved to France at the invitation of King Francis I. She was with him when he died. Why did he spend 16 years on one portrait of one woman? Partly because he kept seeing things to improve. Partly because he was simultaneously working on everything else. And partly, historians think, because he used her as a kind of ongoing laboratory, experimenting with sfumato, the technique he invented of blending tones so gradually that there are no visible lines, so that light and shadow seem to merge the way they do in real life. The Mona Lisa isn't famous because it's the most beautiful painting ever made. It's famous because it does something no painting before it had done. The expression shifts depending on where you look. The background doesn't match on both sides, the left is lower than the right, which distorts the perspective in a way that makes the figure seem to turn. It is a painting that moves without moving. The Last Supper, technically a fresco painted on a wall in Milan, he took 3 years to complete, spent months sometimes just staring at it without touching it, and used an experimental technique that started deteriorating almost immediately after he finished. A monk complained to the Duke that Leonardo would come to the painting, stare at it for hours, add one brushstroke, and leave. Leonardo, when told about this complaint, explained that artists of genius sometimes accomplish the most when they work the least, that the mind is doing the work even when the hand is still. The Duke accepted this explanation. The monk presumably did not. Leonardo spent the last 3 years of his life in France, at a chateau called Clos-Luce in Amboise, as the guest of King Francis I. Francis I was 23. Leonardo was 64. Francis apparently visited him almost every day and they talked about everything: art, science, philosophy, engineering. Francis said of Leonardo, no other man had been born into the world who knew as much as Leonardo. Leonardo died there in 1519. He was 67. The legend, which may actually be true, Vasari reported it, is that Leonardo died in Francis's arms. The king wept. He described it as a great loss to the world, not to the court. Now here's the stuff that doesn't make it into the inspirational posters. Leonardo was gay, or at least bisexual. He was charged with sodomy twice as a young man in Florence, both charges were dropped, and he never married, never had children, and had a close companion named John Giacomo Caprotti, nicknamed Salai, who lived with him for almost 30 years. Salai was described by Leonardo as a thief, a liar, greedy and obstinate. He also appears as the subject of some of Leonardo's most intimate drawings. It was complicated, as things often are. He was also a vegetarian, apparently one of the first notable vegetarians in history, who had a habit of buying caged birds in the market specifically to set them free. He spent his whole life documenting everything, filling notebooks, sketching ideas, writing observations. He intended to publish some of it. He never did. After his death, the notebooks passed through various hands, got scattered across Europe, and were almost entirely unknown to the scientific community for centuries. Which means, and this is the part that genuinely haunts me, some of the ideas in those notebooks, ideas about anatomy, about mechanics, about flight, about optics, ideas that could have accelerated human progress by decades, sat in drawers and private collections while the rest of the world slowly, independently, figured out T.